Well, this morning we continue our sermon series, Rethinking Mission, by asking a really important question that constantly is asked by mission committees and congregations all over the world, and that is, why would we ever leave our city, let alone our own country, when there is so much work and so much that needs to be done right here in our own backyard? It's a question that people have been asking for literally thousands of years. In fact, 2,000 years ago, a godly man and a scholar of the Jewish law approached Jesus, and he asked him this exact same question. Listen to this from the Gospel of Luke. On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he asked, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" "What is written in the law?" he replied. "How do you read it?" And the man answered, "Love the Lord your God with all of your heart, and with all of your soul, and with all of your strength, and with all of your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." "You have answered correctly," Jesus replied. "Do this, and you will live." But the man wanted to justify himself, and so he asked Jesus, "And exactly who is my neighbor?" It is the question, isn't it? The question we've been asking since the beginning of time. Jesus, who am I responsible for? Am I my brother's keeper? And if so, who exactly is my brother? Am I responsible just for the welfare of my immediate family, or also my siblings and aunts and uncles and nephews and cousins? Am I responsible for the welfare of those who go to my church, or in my neighborhood, in my city or state? What about the homeless man down on the 3rd Street promenade? Or the veteran always standing at that corner of San Vicente and Wilshire? And what about those from other countries? That question came up this winter in a big way, didn't it? As the Congress argued over an aid package for Ukraine. Who is my neighbor? Exactly how big is my backyard? Does our responsibility end at the city limits or even the U.S. border? Are we responsible for the welfare of those in Mexico, or those from Mexico who've snuck into our country, or from Central and South America? How about those in Gaza or in Israel? That's a hot topic right now. These are hard questions. Well, when Jesus was asked this question, it was as if he had been waiting for it. And he responded with a story. Now, I don't know if any of you remember the story that he told to this man. Anyone? The Good Samaritan, that's right. So let me read to you. Chapter 10, starting in verse 30. In reply, Jesus said, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. 'Look after him,' he said, 'and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense that you may have.' Now, which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers?" And the expert in the law replied, "The one who had mercy on him." And Jesus told him, "Go and do likewise." A Samaritan, the last person anyone would have thought would have stopped, the last one that anyone would have expected to stop. The Jews hated the Samaritans. They were considered foreigners, despised foreigners, half-breeds, and heretics. And yet, in this story, it is the Samaritan, the foreigner, who Jesus said is moved to the depths of his being with pity. It's the Samaritan who stops and binds up his wounds, carries him to the inn, offers to pay for whatever expenses. Exactly who is my neighbor? Jesus responds by saying everyone, including those that we least expect or want to have as neighbors. And it shouldn't come as too much of a surprise, since from the very beginning, this was always a part of the deal. It was in that original charter with Abraham. When God called Abraham, he said that he would turn him into a great nation so that they could become a blessing to all of the peoples of the earth. This whole idea of a widening of the circle, of seeing everyone on earth as part of God's family, was built into the very foundation of this new faith, this new covenant, this new religion. This was the revolutionary, game-changing idea that Judaism introduced into the ancient world. This idea of monotheism, that there was only one God who had created everything and everyone, that those of different cultures and nationalities and ethnicities weren't created by and protected by some different gods or competing gods, but that every human being on the planet is connected to one another, not in some metaphorical or esoteric way, but are literally blood brothers and sisters through our common ancestors, Adam and Eve. So whatever you believe about the literalness of Adam and Eve, certainly the point is that we are all real family, all born to the one God who loves and adores us all. And so we start to see this progression, this widening of the circle of responsibility in the Old Testament, in stories like Jonah and his calling to go and preach to the Ninevites. But we don't really see it coming into fruition until the New Testament, when Jesus tells stories like this one about the Good Samaritan, or the Samaritan woman at the well, or Jesus is traveling to the Gentile town of Bethsaida. We see it in Jesus' commission, Great Commission, to go out into all the world and make disciples of all nations. Or in the veil tearing in two the moment that Jesus dies, symbolizing our immediate access into God's presence. And then, of course, this movement from nation to world could not be more fully demonstrated than by Paul's calling to preach specifically to the Gentiles. So we go out to other parts of the world, both because these are our brothers and sisters, they are literally our neighbors, but also because the Bible tells us to. We also go out because of the magnitude of need in many other parts of the world, and because of the oversized difference that we can make out there. There is no question that there is plenty of need right here in our own city and in our own country, and we absolutely always need to be very involved in helping care for those who are suffering right here within our own borders. But what Abraham and Jonah and Jesus and Paul are telling us is that our responsibility does not end there. Both because going out there has been part of our calling ever since the very beginning, and also because just as we have right here, out there, there is great need as well. There are plenty of children right here on the streets of LA who are hungry, and we need to be feeding them. But the truth is, it's nothing like the hunger that we see in many poor communities around the world when war or drought or famine strike. And it is a simple fact that our help goes further out there. We can go down to Mexico and build a whole village of houses and a school and a medical clinic for about the same cost as one house here in the U.S. With the same amount of money that it would cost to buy a pair of sneakers here in the U.S., we can literally feed a family of 8 for 3 months in Africa. I'll never forget one time when I flew into Lomé, the capital of Togo in West Africa. I was by myself. It was about midnight. I was the only white face in the baggage claim lounge, and everyone was staring at me like I had just flown in from Mars. And then this young white guy walked into the room, and he saw me. He was like, "Who are you?" He walked straight over to me. He's like, "What are you doing here?" I said, "Oh, I'm just traveling, just backpacking." He said, "Well, where are you staying?" I said, "Oh, there's this little hostel in the Lonely Planet." He said, "How are you getting there?" I said, "I'll probably just take a taxi." He said, "Not at this hour, you won't. I'm driving you." And on the 30-minute car drive, he told me this most incredible story about his life. He was from France, and when you graduate from college, I'm not sure if they still do this, but you used to have to spend 2 years in the military. But if you, for any reason, didn't feel comfortable serving in the military, then you could ask, and they would send you somewhere else to do some kind of good work on behalf of the government of France. And because this young man was a pacifist, they sent him down to Lomé to be the assistant lead accountant at the big national hospital in the capital of Togo. He had gotten an accounting degree from the University of Paris, and so they thought that he could be a real help down there. Well, after 3 months after he arrived, the lead accountant at the hospital unexpectedly died, and they made him the senior accountant. He was 3 months out of college and the head of the accounting department at the largest hospital in the nation of Togo. He said he was scared out of his wits. He felt totally unprepared and inadequate. And yet, when he was telling me this story, it had been a little over a year later, and he said that some of the new accounting techniques and principles that he had been taught in Paris, he had brought into the accounting department there at this hospital, and they had estimated that they were saving thousands of dollars every year because of these new techniques, which was literally saving thousands of lives more every year because of these things that he was bringing. We pulled up in front of the hostel, and before I got out of the car, he said, "You know, if I had stayed in Paris after graduation, I would be lucky if I were sorting the mail in the mailroom of one of the big accounting firms in Paris. And yet here I am, saving thousands of lives a year because I was willing to leave my comfort zone and come down here." There really is just so much need and such a difference that we can make when we go out there. I know so many of you have had the exact same feeling when you've come back from Mexico. How much need there is so close to our own city, and what a difference we can make so easily. To take the gospel seriously, to take God's original covenant with Abraham seriously, is to recognize that as Christians, we are no longer responsible just for our own families or our own neighborhoods or communities or nation. When we give our lives to God, our backyard begins to expand. Our immediate family becomes every human being scattered across this wide globe of ours. And we are expected to think and act as if they are all part of our immediate family. From those sitting in the pews next to us, to the veterans down at the VA, the homeless teens on the street of Hollywood, to the illegal immigrants in our midst, and those trying to rebuild their lives in Haiti, in Gaza, and Israel, and Ukraine. From those who need our help after the floodings in Minnesota, to the landslides in Papua New Guinea. And I'm not saying we don't have a special opportunity and a special obligation to those right here in our community, because of course we do. And it is our greatest privilege to serve those in need here in the City of Angels. But I'm just saying that whenever the question is asked, which of God's children should we serve? Those in our own backyard or those on the other side of the world? I hope you will see that question as foreign and jarring as if someone were to ask you, which of your own children do you love the most? So how big is your backyard? Amen.